This is CBN NewsWatch.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for CBN NewsWatch for Friday, May 1st. I am George Thomas. Americans across the country are growing restless and ready to get back to work. Those feelings come ahead in Michigan, where, despite efforts by the Republican-controlled legislature, the governor extended her stay-at-home orders. Our senior Washington correspondent Jennifer Wishon explains.
Despite protests by hundreds of Michiganders at the state capitol Thursday, and efforts by the Republican-controlled House and Senate, Democrat Governor Gretchen Whitmer signed 3 executive orders extending the state's emergency and disaster declarations through the end of May, saying scientific data shows the state isn't out of the woods yet.
Can't put a hard and fast timeline because a lot of this depends on human behavior and our ability to observe these best practices.
Some residents see it as a political power grab.
I've had enough of being told what I can and cannot do. I've had enough of worrying about bills and making money.
No, especially a politician, has the right to devalue an individual by labeling them non-essential.
There were tense moments. State Senator Dana Polhanke tweeting, "Directly above me, men with rifles yelling at us. Some of my colleagues who own bulletproof vests are wearing them." Michigan has been hit hard, registering more than 40,000 cases, suffering nearly 3,700 deaths. But not everyone buys the numbers.
I do think that we have a virus, but I do think that the numbers are inflated. I think it's all political.
Republicans who control the legislature think the governor is overstepping her authority.
At this point in the COVID crisis, what can the governor accomplish alone that she can't do together with the leadership of the House and the Senate?
The House passed a resolution allowing the Speaker of the House to take legal action against the governor for her actions during the pandemic. She's facing a number of lawsuits, including one by 5 businesses, arguing her pandemic-related executive orders have shuttered civil society, placed 10 million people under house arrest, and taking jobs away from nearly 1.2 million people, all without due process of law.
My husband's an electrician, and he cannot go back to work supposedly until May 7th, as long as that goes through, but he can go out on a golf course as of today. I don't think it's fair to start making those provisions.
It is very important that we as Americans stand up for our Constitution and for our civil liberties, because as we know, government continues to take and take.
In the coming days, Governor Whitmer says she hopes to reopen certain sectors of the economy, like construction. Jennifer Wishon, CBN News.
Our medical reporter Lori Johnson is here now with an update. Lori, yesterday President Trump announced new measures to help senior citizens. What are they?
Well, we know that senior citizens are particularly hit hard by this virus. We've been talking so much in the last few weeks about how the death rate is going down. Now people are thinking, scientists, it might be 1%, maybe even lower. But, George, that's not across the board. If you look at people ages 70 and above, the death rate among people who contract the coronavirus is anywhere between 9% and 14%. Wow. That death rate goes up as age goes up. And what's really shocking and so disheartening is of all the deaths of coronavirus in the United States, 20% are people in nursing homes. 1 out of 5 deaths from this coronavirus has occurred in a nursing home. We know recently in Massachusetts, 1 nursing home had 70 deaths. And so investigators are looking into what went wrong. And it looks like, among other things, this was a poorly staffed nursing home. They're not necessarily blaming it on the staff, but just of the way that it's set up. Not very well staffed, and they didn't have the PPEs. So the president has now established a commission for nursing homes, and among other things, the federal government is stepping in. The FEMA is going to be giving PPEs to these nursing homes, personal protective equipment. That's so important. VA employees are going to be helping out some of the nursing homes that are particularly run by the VA. These are nursing homes where our nation's heroes, our World War II heroes, are staying. And so this is very helpful. Also, the National Guard is being deployed to some VA hospitals, or rather nursing homes, to help out there to disinfect, to clean these nursing homes. And also, this is really interesting too, National Guard troops are actually substituting for senior citizens who volunteer, because think about it, our volunteers are oftentimes retired people who have more time on their hands than working people, and these are the people who volunteer at our food banks and at our election polls. I know at my polling place, everyone who works there is a senior. And remember, as these restrictions, as these stay-at-home restrictions are being lifted, they're not being lifted for senior citizens, regardless of whether they live in a nursing home. So these folks need to maybe not go back to their volunteer and instead let the National Guard do their volunteering for them.
I'm curious, aside from the seniors, what other vulnerable populations are getting special treatment? So
we've been seeing that the death rate and the outbreak rate is disproportionate among some of our minority communities, particularly minority communities who are in low-income areas. And so what's happening is there's going to be proactive testing in some of these communities, talking about African-American, Latino, and Asian American communities, particularly low-income communities where you have multi-generations living in the same house, especially small homes. They're going to go in and test these folks proactively, and if they find cases, isolate them and treat them that way. Contact tracing.
Okay, terrific. Thank you so much, Lily. As always, we appreciate it. We will move overseas now, where Our Crowd, one of Israel's leading funding organizations, is taking on the challenge of beating the coronavirus. As Chris Mitchell reports from Jerusalem, they just announced a major step to help provide a vaccine for the world. Take a look.
2 months ago, as COVID-19 began taking its grip on the world, CBN News reported on the research and development of a vaccine by the Migdal Research Institute.
We've reached a winning formula for vaccination of poultry, which worked very, very nicely.
The Institute's work toward that poultry vaccine started in 2016, which gave Migdal a 4-year head start against this sickness because it's similar to the human virus.
So we're now backing this project, and we're just beyond ourselves in terms of hope and optimism that this kind of project coming out of Israel's Galilee can bring potentially very, very good news to the world.
Jonathan Medved, founder of Our Crowd, held their annual summit just before the pandemic. He chose to fund this research under a new company called MigVax. He says its formula brings a number of advantages.
This is not their first rodeo. They've been working on a variety of coronavirus-related vaccines in this area now for some time. But on top of that, this is an oral vaccine, which is pretty much unique in terms of the other candidates that are out there. It doesn't require a shot. It'll work in hot climates in parts of Africa, because we need a vaccine for everybody. It doesn't use actually live virus or dead virus in the vaccine. So people who are immunocompromised, who are afraid of catching it, don't have to worry about taking a vaccine that has small attenuated amounts.
Medved says his organization has been on a mission since the pandemic began.
My problem is, I told my wife when it started, I said, we'll get some quality time together, right? That hasn't worked out, okay? I've been working harder than ever before. We're working globally, so we go, often to 2 or 3 in the morning, and then, back at it in the AM. And I'll tell you, it keeps you young, it keeps you motivated, it keeps you excited.
He says it's all part of Israel's biblical calling.
I feel very much that we're all here for a purpose. And the purpose of Israel renewed, Israel rebuilt, Israel established not just as a strong member of the family of nations, is that we are supposed to do this stuff. Okay, we are supposed to.
Our Middle East Bureau Chief Chris Mitchell joins me now. Chris, Hebrew University researchers just came out with an analysis of the global lockdowns. What were their conclusions?
Well, it's a very important research, especially in light of Jennifer's story about Michigan. The conclusion was basically that Israel and other nations around the world may not have needed their lockdowns. They point to the enormous consequences of these lockdowns: unemployment, isolation, loneliness, drug abuse, domestic violence, and the economic devastation that's really hit so many countries. So what they did is they calculated the number of ICU and hospital beds in a particular country and then determined whether or not the coronavirus would actually overwhelm the hospital system. And they said here in Israel it didn't. There were a few countries, I think the UK was one, they said probably needed a lockdown. But they said a combination of social distancing, hygiene measures, masks, and separating those at-risk populations would really be good for their population. They actually looked to Sweden as the model, and they really, one of their conclusions, George, was that the cure really has been worse than the disease.
Chris, Israel just celebrated its Independence Day. Why was this one so different?
Well, this one was so different because of COVID-19. They had no celebrations like they usually do, no big fireworks displays. Actually, Israel was on a total lockdown from, say, 5 o'clock local time Wednesday night to about 7 o'clock Thursday morning. That was sort of their July 4th, and they wanted to prevent people from getting together for the barbecues and the family gatherings that people traditionally do. They did have a flyover to the healthcare workers, just like they have in the U.S., but, you know, George, if you look back 72 years of Israel as a nation, it is still a miracle. It has tremendous prophetic significance. And the conclusion for many people, it says in Hebrew, Am Israel High, the people of Israel live. After 2,000 years, Israel is back together. And as we heard John Medved of our crowd, you know, they are the ones they believe to be a light to the nations. They're the ones that they want to get a cure for cancer. They want to find a vaccine for COVID-19. And so really, after 72 years, Israel is still a miracle.
This is a special season in the Bible called Counting the Omer. What is that, and why is it important for Christians?
Well, George, it's found in the book of Leviticus, you know, from Passover to Shavuot, which is the word for Pentecost in Hebrew, Pentecost meaning 50 days. The Omer in the times of the Bible was a measure of grain. And so what Leviticus says is count the grains from Passover all the way to Shavuot, 50 days. Now we know Shavuot as Pentecost, the day when the Holy Spirit came down and the church was born. Now there's a link from Passover in the salvation when Jesus went to the cross and then rose from the dead, and then Shavuot when the Holy Spirit was poured out, and actually just in the upper room behind me on Mount Zion. So for Christians, it really has a lot of spiritual significance, counting the Omer from Passover to Pentecost.
Chris, real quickly, what do you have planned on this week's Jerusalem Dateline?
Well, more about what's happening here in Israel about the COVID-19. We have a story about Soapy, actually a state-of-the-art Israeli innovation, how to wash your hands. We have a story on Independence Day. We actually have an interview with somebody who was there on May 14, 1948. And we're going to talk more about the counting of the Omer there in this week's Jerusalem Dateline.
Okay, terrific. I know the font says Chris Mitchell, medical reporter, but he really isn't. He's our Jerusalem bureau chief, my man. Chris, you can catch his program, Jerusalem Dateline, tonight on CBN News Channel at 9:30 Eastern, right here on our terrific channel. In political news, let's move on. Democratic presidential candidate Joe Biden is being called on to respond to sexual assault accusations. Tara Reid says she was assaulted by Biden while working in his office back in 1993. Reid told ABC News that she complained to the Senate Personnel Office that Biden had made her feel uncomfortable, but didn't mention the assault and has no record of the complaint. In a statement, Biden's campaign says the former vice president firmly believes that women have a right to be heard and heard respectfully. However, the statement went on to say the claim isn't true. The Little Sisters of the Poor will be back before the Supreme Court next week, this time virtually, for oral arguments in their case against Pennsylvania. The now 8-year-long battle is over their religious exemption from the HHS HHS contraceptive mandate. The legal group Beckett represents them and says, quote, now more than ever, as the Little Sisters work tirelessly to preserve the physical and spiritual health of the elderly poor in their care, it is important for Pennsylvania and other state governments to leave the Little Sisters alone and let them carry out their ministry in peace. Coming up, the right to worship at risk in America in the face of restrictions that many pastors believe have gone too far. That story in a moment.
Life is better with a good night's sleep. Get your free DVD or booklet of Protect Your Sleep as the world watches from the outside.
It's a big diplomatic tug of war here in the Middle East.
Go inside the story with Jerusalem Dateline.
Israeli archaeologists are talking about a discovery that could change the thinking about the Temple Mount.
Join CBN Jerusalem Bureau Chief Chris Mitchell and get the biblical perspective on the events shaping the world.
What starts in Israel then ends up going to other places.
Watch Jerusalem Dateline Friday night at 9:30 on the CBN News Channel.
Life. It's meant to be lived fully. Jesus said it. I came to give you life. Life to the fullest. Life in your family. Life in your finances. Life in your body, mind, and spirit. Life in your everyday. At CBN.com, we're taking what Jesus said seriously. We're here to help you discover life. Life. Live it fully. CBN.com.
You are watching the CBN News Channel. Churches across California, like many in America, are facing challenges with worship services. Many pastors believe that even with following all the social distancing rules, their religious liberties are still at stake. Our Mark Martin talked with conservative radio host Todd Starnes about their fight.
Todd, tell us about the legal battle in California over the lockdown and religious freedom.
It's a big problem, not just in California, but really across the nation. But last week, a federal judge ruled that the state of California does have the right to ban churches from meeting together in corporate worship. Several churches in California filed a lawsuit, and they said, hey, look, all we want to do is have the drive-in church services. Some of the churches actually wanted to have in-person meetings, and the federal judge says, no, you cannot do that. And the state has the authority under the emergency orders to dictate and to enforce those policies.
So where do things stand today?
Well, there's a lot of unrest right now and a lot of rumblings in the Christian community. I had the pastor of a very large, really a mega church just north of Los Angeles on my radio program, and he said it really is time to have that conversation. When can the churches get back to the business of holding church services? And the pastor brought up a very interesting issue. His name is Dr. Paul Chappell at Lancaster Baptist Church. He said the problem is, unlike many of the other industries out there, whether it be the restaurant industry or the retail industry, that churches don't have a lobbyist at the State House really petitioning and lobbying on their behalf. And he says it's very troubling that at this moment there are not conversations being had in the halls of government about when the churches can reopen their doors.
Let's talk big picture, Todd. Why is this fight so important for not only California, but the entire nation?
We are watching an unprecedented attack on our civil liberties. And I wrote about this in my book, Culture Jihad, that came out in October, that unless people of faith stand up and fight for liberty, then we are going to have a very big problem in this country. Now, keep in mind, the issue here is religious liberty. There are attacks on the Second Amendment. There are attacks on freedom of assembly. It goes on and on and on. But the issue is religious liberty. And I believe that religious liberty is our bedrock freedom. And if our government is able to crack religious liberty and weaken religious liberty, and by government, I mean these state governments, then I believe every one of our other freedoms is in jeopardy. And that's exactly what's happened here. It's not a surprise that one of the first things they did was shut down churches in just about every state across this nation.
All right, Todd Starnes, thanks so much for bringing us up to date on this important story.
Thanks, Mark.
On October 1st, 1961, history was made when a tiny station began transmitting the first signals of the Christian Broadcasting Network.
CBN, the Christian Broadcasting Network.
And now, a new era has begun with the all-new CBN News Channel.
Just moments ago, the Iron Dome intercepted an incoming rocket right on the Gaza border.
In ministering in this area, spiritual warfare is definitely involved.
A 24/7 news network, bringing you the news you want from a source you can trust.
In Kenya, 40% of the medical services are actually provided by these Christian hospitals.
Let's talk about the economy.
Believers here are joining together to win people to Jesus Christ.
All your favorite shows now in one place. Go to CBNNewsChannel.com to find out how to get the CBN News Channel on your TV all day, every day. CBN News.
Life is better with a good night's sleep. Get your free DVD or booklet of Protect Your Sleep today.
Life. It's meant to be lived fully. Jesus said it. I came to give you life. Life to the fullest. Life in your family. Life in your finances. Life in your body, mind, and spirit. Life in your everyday. At CBN.com, we're taking what Jesus said seriously. We're here to help you discover life. Life. Live it fully. CBN.com.
It's clear that testing for COVID-19 is the critical piece to get the country back to business. One option is a self-test done at home, which the Food and Drug Administration has now okayed. Mark Martin has a story.
We've all seen reports of long lines and frustration from consumers as they waited for drive-through testing. Part of that is due to the test requirements.
We have a 3-stage process where we are doing a verbal triage to see what their symptoms are, see if they meet criteria for the testing, and if they do, then they will be registered, seen by a provider, and then they will have the test done.
Another option in several states is called a drive-up self-swab nasal test, offered at drugstores like Rite Aid, overseen by their pharmacists. Now there's an opportunity to test yourself at home. The FDA approved this diagnostic test designed by LabCorp.
It's very easy and safe to perform. Our data show that it's as accurate as having it performed in the doctor's office or in a clinic. They can perform the test, put it in the tube of saline, and overnight it back to the lab, and then get the results thereafter from LabCorp.
CBN News also reached out to LabCorp. The company did not respond to our inquiry, but it did release a statement saying that the self-test will help prevent the risk of transmitting the virus to others, and it will also reduce the demand for personal protective equipment because a clinician is not required. LabCorp will make the kits initially available to frontline healthcare workers and first responders. Its goal is to make the test available to the public in the coming weeks. The $119 price tag could be an issue, but LabCorp says it will work with customers and health insurance companies so folks don't have to pay up front. LabCorp also notes that its at-home test does not detect antibodies or immunity. CBN medical reporter Lori Johnson explains the difference.
Because the antibody test, a lot of people are confused about it because you hear testing. There are two main tests. One of them is the test to see if you have COVID-19 right now. The other is the antibody test, also called the antigen test, which tells you whether you ever had it. And that is so important because an estimated 60% of people who had COVID-19 had no symptoms. They never even knew they had it.
If you test positive with the antibody test, Johnson says you probably now are immune to COVID-19. And doctors believe people with antibodies may be key to treating the most critically ill. These former patients are donating plasma after they recover. Mark Martin, CBN News.
Coming up, one pet owner is calling his dog's return home after a tornado a miracle.
Life is better with a good night's sleep. Get your free DVD or booklet of Protect Your Sleep today.
I'm Ephraim Graham, and this is Studio 5. Cruise with me as I discover the good things happening in the world of music, sports, television, and movies.
The fact that Ryan Coogler was going to be directing the film, I knew that something special was going to happen.
We'll chat with artists at the forefront of entertainment and explore the connection between popular culture and faith.
I asked my pastor, I said, well, does that mean I'm supposed to be a preacher? He says, well, no, you already have a pulpit.
Watch Studio 5 Wednesday night at 9:30.
Remember for a moment what it was like to be a child. You believed every story you were told. You saw a world full of endless possibilities. What stories will the world's orphaned and at-risk children believe? We believe the Bible tells the only story truly worth believing. We believe that every child should have the opportunity to dream, the chance to take challenges and turn them into possibilities, the chance to stand on the promises of God, to recognize their place in the greatest story ever told. They have their whole lives ahead of them. Theirs is a world of endless possibilities. They are looking for a story to believe. We will tell them that story. Will you join us?
Welcome back. A dog is back home with his family after being lost 54 days following a devastating tornado hit their home in Cooksville, Tennessee. Eric Johnson posted the good news on Facebook, telling friends, me and my wife would pray daily that God would keep her safe out there until he brought her back home to us. Well, today, those prayers came true. Johnson says Bella, their Australian shepherd, had been missing since the twister hit their community on March 3rd. He says Bella was found not too far from home. He says friends had helped them go out and look for her after the storm. They didn't give up helping them look for her and watch for her. He also posted that Bella is doing well, has a full belly, and is sleeping in her bed where she belongs. That is it for this edition of CBN News Watch. You can find more of our news programs on the CBN News Channel anytime or online with cbnnews.com. Connect with us by emailing us at newswatch@cbn.com. Okay, folks, thank you so much. Have a great rest of the day and a great weekend from all of us here. Goodbye and God bless.